Welcome back to the deep dive. This deep dive uh, is for all the facade people out there.
Yeah.
Remember those deep dives we did on BIM in Australia and LODs? Well,
Yes.
today we're bringing those ideas together
Right.
and going even deeper into a specific area.
Yeah.
Facade BIM. You might be thinking facade BIM. Sounds pretty niche.
Hmm.
But trust me,
Yeah.
understanding how this works
Huh.
can transform how you think about building design,
Right.
especially if you're interested in that sweet spot where aesthetics and functionality meet.
Yeah. It really is fascinating how facade design, while seemingly a specialized area, is
Mm.
actually at the heart of so many critical aspects of a building project.
Right. And that's what we're diving into today. The strategic use of LODs in facade design. Specifically, we'll be focusing on why LOD 300 and LOD 350 often hit that sweet spot of detail without going overboard into LOD 400 territory, which, as you know, is usually reserved for those super complex fabrication situations.
Absolutely. It's all about working smarter, not harder, and choosing the right LOD for the job.
Okay, let's unpack this facade BIM. What is it and why should we care?
Well, facades are so much more than just aesthetics. They have a huge impact on a building's performance, its structural integrity, and even the comfort of the people inside. And that's where BIM comes in. With Facade BIM, we can create a digital representation of the facade, allowing us to visualize and analyze it in a way that was never possible before. This means we can catch potential problems early on, saving a lot of headaches and money down the road.
So it's like having a virtual crystal ball that lets you see into the future of the building and fix any facade-related issues before they even have a chance to materialize.
That's a great way to put it, and a key part of this process is utilizing those LOD's levels of development in a strategic way.
Right. And like we talked about before, not every project needs to go all the way to the highest LOD. It's about finding that balance, right? Figuring out the right level of detail for each specific project.
Exactly. And in the world of facades, LOD 300 often emerges as that sweet spot. It gives you accurate dimensions and geometry for coordination with other building systems, but without overwhelming you with excessive detail.
So it's like having a detailed roadmap of the facade without getting bogged down in every single nut and bolt. Can you give us some specific examples of what kind of problems we can catch at this LOD 300 stage?
Absolutely. Think about those vertical mullions on a typical curtain wall. With LOD 300, you can see exactly where those mullions intersect with the floor slabs. And sometimes you discover they clash, but because you're working with a BIM model at LOD 300, you catch that clash virtually. So you can adjust the spacing in the model and avoid what would have been a major problem during construction.
It's amazing. It's like preventing a domino effect of problems before the first domino even falls. What other kinds of potential issues can we avoid by using LOD 300?
Well, let's say you have facade brackets that need to connect to structural supports. LOD 300 allows you to see if those brackets align properly. You might discover they're too close to the edge of a slab, which means they wouldn't have enough support. Again, by catching this in the model, you can make the necessary adjustments and avoid a costly rework situation on site.
So it's not just about avoiding clashes, it's also about having that confidence that everything is going to fit together the way it's supposed to. Like having a virtual assembly guide, right?
That's right. And when you need to go a bit deeper than LOD 300, that's where LOD 350 comes in. This level gives you that extra layer of detail, especially for those unique facade features, without going all the way to fabrication level.
So what kind of details are we talking about with LOD 350? What makes it different from LOD 300?
With LOD 350, you're getting more information about connection points, specifically how different facade elements are attached to each other and to the building structure. LOD 350 allows you to refine the coordination and make sure everything aligns perfectly. It's particularly valuable when you're dealing with more complex facade designs.
Can you give us an example of how that plays out in a real project?
Sure. Imagine you're working on a building with inclined columns, those structural elements that are angled instead of perfectly vertical. Now, those columns are going to intersect the facade at different points on each floor. And with LOD 350, you can model those intersections precisely and check for any clashes with facade anchors or other components. You might find you need to adjust the placement of those anchors to ensure a smooth installation, and LOD 350 allows you to make those adjustments virtually.
It's like you're playing a high-stakes game of Tetris, making sure all those building components fit together perfectly. And I imagine that sometimes those components involve more than just the facade team, right? You've got interior designers, structural engineers. Everyone needs to be on the same page.
Absolutely. And that's one of the most powerful aspects of using BIM at this level of detail. It facilitates communication and collaboration across different disciplines.
Okay, I'm really starting to see how this coordination gets pretty complex. Can you give us a specific example of how LOD 350 helps with those multidisciplinary situations?
Certainly. Think about interior ceiling levels and how they interact with the facade. This is especially important with things like curtain walls or those sleek shading devices. LOD 350 lets you see those intersections in detail. For example, you might discover that the shading devices clash with the planned ceiling height. But because you've identified this clash in the model, the facade team and the interior designers can work together to adjust the design and avoid a potentially major conflict down the road.
So we're not just coordinating the facade elements themselves, we're coordinating with all the other systems in the building. And with LOD 350, we're doing it early enough to avoid costly changes later.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's all about communication visualization and having that shared understanding of the design intent. And that actually brings to mind another interesting example, the integration of paving stones with the facade.
Like paving stones. How does that tie into facade design? I wouldn't have thought those two would need that much coordination.
You might be surprised. Think about those big urban projects where the pavement runs right up to the base of the building. You want that transition to be smooth and seamless, right? Well, with LOD 350, you can model that connection in detail.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection. So let's say you're using those large format GRC panels for the facade. How does LOD 350 come into play?
LOD 350 allows you to see exactly how those GRC panels align with the paving stones. You might find you need to adjust the panel heights to make sure there's a nice smooth transition and avoid any awkward gaps or changes in elevation.
Wow, so even something as seemingly simple as paving stones can benefit from this detailed modeling approach.
Absolutely. It's all about getting that level of precision that allows for a truly integrated and well-executed design. And this brings us to a key takeaway. LOD 300 and 350 really do offer this incredible balance between accuracy and cost effectiveness. You're getting enough detail to catch those coordination issues and communicate effectively across different disciplines, but you're not over-modeling and driving up costs unnecessarily.
This is all making so much sense. So we've covered a lot of ground here. Why facade BIM is so important. How using LODs strategically can save time and money. But what about LOD 400? When do we need to go to that level of detail?
That's a great question. LOD 400 is where we get into the really nitty-gritty details, fabrication level information. We're talking about modeling every nut, bolt, notch hole, all those intricate details that are needed to actually manufacture the facade components.
That sounds pretty intense.
Yeah,
It probably adds a lot of time to the modeling process.
it definitely can. And that's why we don't jump to LOD 400 unless it's absolutely necessary. Remember, it's a significant investment in terms of time and resources.
But when is it actually necessary? When does LOD 400 become the right tool for the job?
Think about those projects with really complex geometries, those curvy freeform facades that push the boundaries of design. To fabricate those accurately, you need that level of detail that LOD 400 provides.
I see, because those complex shapes can't just be made with standard off-the-shelf components. You need detailed fabrication information to make sure everything's in manufacture to the exact specifications.
Precisely. And sometimes it's not just the shape of the facade, but the material itself. If you're using some kind of unique high-performance material that requires very tight tolerances, then LOD 400 might be the only way to guarantee that everything fits together perfectly.
Okay, that makes sense. So complex geometries, unique materials, tight tolerances, those are the triggers for LOD 400.
Mm.
But what about after the building is built? What about creating those as-built models that capture the final condition of the facade?
That's where LOD 500 comes in, and it's a step that often gets overlooked. But LOD 500 is incredibly valuable for things like facility management, future renovations, and really anything that requires accurate information about the facade long after the construction is finished.
So LOD 500 is like the digital twin of the finished facade.
Exactly. It reflects all the changes that might have happened during construction. Things sometimes get adjusted on site. So LOD 500 makes sure that the model is a truly accurate representation of what's actually been built, not just what was planned.
Right, because even with the best planning and coordination, there are always going to be some adjustments made in the field.
We'll be right back after a quick break. This podcast is brought to you by the LinkedIn group BIM Australia and New Zealand. Join our public group, BIM Australia and New Zealand, for more discussions and insights into the world of BIM.
So LOD 500 captures that reality. And how does this benefit the building owner or facility manager down the road?
In so many ways. Imagine you need to replace a panel years down the line. With an LOD 500 model, you know exactly what type of panel it is, its dimensions, all the specifications you need to order a replacement.
That's like having a detailed owner's manual for the entire facade, but digital.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that you can often go straight from LOD 300 or 350 to LOD 500. You don't necessarily need LOD 400 to create that as-built model.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Well, if the LOD 300 or 350 model has been kept accurate and up-to-date throughout the design and construction process, you can simply update it with any field measurements and verification data after the facade is complete. So you're essentially building upon the existing model, adding those final details to create a truly comprehensive as-built representation.
So it's about being strategic and efficient with your modeling efforts. You're focusing on the level of detail that's actually needed at each stage of the project and avoiding unnecessary work.
Precisely. It's all about working smarter, not harder. And speaking of working smarter, I think it's important to emphasize that even with all this amazing BIM technology at our fingertips, we can't forget about the value of those good old-fashioned 2D drawings.
Wait, 2D drawings? But aren't we talking about the power and efficiency of BIM? I thought 2D drawings were becoming a thing of the past.
They still have their place. Remember, facades are complex systems with lots of intricate details. And sometimes it's just easier to convey those details in a 2D drawing, especially for things like connections, transitions, and special conditions.
So it's like having the best of both worlds, right? The 3D BIM model provides that incredible visualization and coordination power, and the 2D drawings could be used to highlight those intricate details that might get lost in the 3D model.
Exactly. It's about using the right tool for the right job and recognizing that both 2D and 3D representations have their strengths. And as facade designers, it's our job to find that balance between different tools and techniques to make sure the facade is built correctly and truly reflects the design intent.
I'm really starting to appreciate how facade design is so much more than just aesthetics. It's a complex and nuanced process that involves so many different systems and disciplines, and it impacts the entire building.
It really does. And it's an area that's evolving so rapidly, especially with technologies like BIM becoming more sophisticated and accessible. And based on what we've discussed today, I think there are a few key takeaways that anyone involved in facade design should keep in mind.
Okay, let's hear them. What are your top takeaways from our deep dive into facade BIM?
First, don't fall into the trap of thinking that a higher LOD is always better. Sometimes a well-executed LOD 300 model is more than enough to achieve your goals. It's about choosing the right level of detail for the specific needs of the project.
Right. It's about choosing the right level of detail for the specific needs of the project. What's your next key takeaway?
The second takeaway is that LOD 500 is a game changer for facility management. It's not just an archive. It's a powerful tool that can be used to operate and maintain the facade throughout its entire lifespan.
That digital twin idea is so powerful. Being able to access that level of detailed information about the facade years after it's been built can be incredibly valuable. Okay, what's your last key takeaway?
My last takeaway is all about the importance of communication and collaboration. Facade design doesn't happen in a vacuum. It involves architects, structural engineers, contractors, fabricators, and everyone needs to be on the same page. And using BIM effectively with the right LODs can really help facilitate that communication and collaboration.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the world of facade BIM. I feel like I've learned so much about how these digital tools are transforming the way we design and build facades. But before we wrap things up, is there anything else you want to add? Any final thoughts for our listeners?
I think the most important thing to remember is that technology is just a tool. It's the people behind the technology, the designers, the engineers, the builders who truly bring these facades to life. And by embracing these tools and using them strategically, we can create buildings that are not only beautiful and functional, but also more efficient, sustainable, and ultimately more successful.
That's a great point. It's easy to get caught up in all the technology, but ultimately it's about the people, the creativity, and the collaboration that make these projects successful.
Absolutely, and that's what makes this field so exciting. It's constantly evolving with new technologies and new ways of thinking.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into facade BIM, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from our conversation?
I think it would be this facade BIM isn't just for the tech-savvy folks. It's a tool that can benefit everyone involved in a project, from the architects and engineers to the contractors and facility managers.
Right. It's about breaking down those silos and creating a more integrated and collaborative approach to building.
Exactly. And by embracing these tools and using them strategically, we can create buildings that are not only beautiful and functional, but also more efficient, sustainable, and ultimately more successful.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the world of facade BIM. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure. I hope our listeners are walking away with a deeper appreciation for the complexities and possibilities of facade design in the age of BIM.
We'll be back next Friday at 8 p.m. Melbourne time with another deep dive into something cool. Until then, keep learning, keep building, and keep innovating. This podcast series is designed by Ihsan Mokhtari and generated by AI.